also create a curriculum to take back to their students based on their research project. And so they're going to give you a little bit of both. So they're going to tell you a little bit about their research, but also tell you a little bit about how they're going to bring it back to their classroom and to their students.
My name is Randall. I teach Earth and Space Science at Albemarle High School, and today I'm going to talk to you about discharge and stream power in the use of microgenerators to determine water quality testing in the Rivanna. So to start off with, my ultimate goal was to actually create a self-generating system that would actually test the turbidity levels within the Rivanna River. And to do this, and why I focused on the Rivanna to begin with, is the 700 miles of this drainage basin. Of that, if you recall Phillips' research, 315 don't meet the water quality standards, and of that 315, about 135 miles actually are considered poor quality water. So if this is eventually ending up in the Chesapeake Bay, this is something of great importance. So to start with, I actually piggybacked off of Philip and his group's research, and I focused on two different generators that had already been previously tested. So these are generators that are oftentimes meant for pipe systems, but can also be used for low head. And to talk about how the electricity is actually generated, there's two major variables that need to be considered when talking about how the electricity from the water can actually be powered or generated. So to start off with, head. Head is actually the pressure that is generated by the water itself. So oftentimes there's three different systems of head. Low head would be open water systems. All the way up to high head would actually be the dams or the reservoirs created for the larger hydroelectric power plants. The other variable is the flow or the discharge of the river. So this takes into consideration two parameters. That would be the area of the water, so whether you're talking about the entire stretch of the drainage basin or a small cross section, and also the velocity of the water. So I'm going to focus first on the discharge. This is more or less the background information. So to determine the discharge of the river, I focused on one cross section of the river, mostly at Riverview Park. So to do this, I needed to determine the width, the depth, and the actual velocity for that particular cross section. I actually segmented out the depth values so that you can see the subsections are actually useful in not only generating a mean value for the depth, but also helping to determine how the stream power is segmented into each of those smaller sections. However, the assumption overall for this particular experiment, and more so for this calculation, is I need to exclude the river basin sediment load or bed, as that usually generates drag and actually slows down the velocity. And I also had to assume that the river basin was rectangular in shape. However, that's not what the river basin actually shows. To determine the stream power, first off, you need to understand that the maturity of the river actually depends on the stream power itself. So towards the left-hand side, you can actually see a diagram that shows the maturity level of what we expect from the Rivanna River. So there are riffles, or areas where there's rapids, and then there are pools where the meander opens up and you actually see a larger depth value in that area. Excuse me. So to determine the actual stream power, I had to consider not only the velocity or the discharge value, but I also needed to consider the slope in regards to the gravity constant as well as the density of the water. So lastly, the end goal was to end up with some form of water quality testing in this area. So I chose to focus on turbidity. And turbidity overall is measuring the suspended solids within the fluid. So in this case, the more turbid or the more cloudy the substance, we can begin to make some generalizations or assumptions about the water quality itself. So oftentimes they correlate. More turbidity equates to lower water quality. Oftentimes this is usually measured in something called nephelometric turbidity units. However, I excluded this from the actual research as you'll come to find there was really a difficult level of trying to associate one to the other. So turbidity testing, I actually used a Arduino platform since this is some of the materials that I'm least experienced on. It allowed me an opportunity to actually dive into this part of the project and to learn quite a bit from this portion of the research. I chose to use a very simple sensor, so the turbidity levels are actually measured in output of volts, and this is inversely proportional to the turbidity. So the higher the voltage level that was read, the actual water quality of that particular sample was actually better. So I'm going to start with the data and what I received from this. I started off with creating a cross-section or an actual profile of the depth values that I collected at this particular region. So what I did is strung tape across the width and measured at segments of 1 to 2 meters across each area's depth, and what I found is that the east bank of the riverside actually had the pool, or in this case, the deeper value for the depth. So this helped me to not only focus where I needed to test the generators, so the deeper the value, the oftentimes more velocity you receive in that area, but also what I found is that the overall depth value for the whole cross-section of the river didn't exceed 1.1 meters. So that put into perspective where I should expect some of my data. From this, I used this profile to actually compare to the discharge and the stream power. So what I found is that the deeper the riverbed, the more velocity and therefore the greater the discharge, as well as what I can expect for stream power. So deeper water created more power. And overall what I found is that there was that direct correlation, but I had to consider when testing the generators that one segment being 1 to 2 meters across was not the same width of the generator itself. The generator's input or opening was a couple of millimeters across, and therefore I could already begin to see that some of the data that I expected to see from the generator testing wasn't going to generate the power necessary for my entire system. So I already began to make some conclusions based on that. So when I actually went to the testing level of the generators, what I found is that previous testing already found there was little to no power generated at any of these. To back up for the depth value and the stream power, this actually helped to support why the generators were not creating any form of power. So I tested at 4 different locations, and all 4 locations there was literally no voltage readings. So there was no power being generated from this micro generator. That meant overall I could not actually use this as a way to self-sustain the rest of the circuit. However, I did want to actually test the validity of the sensors. So if water quality testing and creating a self-sustained system was the end goal, I still wanted to see whether the turbidity sensor was capable of determining the turbidity level and therefore beginning to make some generalizations about the water. So I took 4 samples from local areas within the county, one of them being the river, and I used filtered water as the control. So what you see on the right-hand side is over time, I wanted to figure out, did the levels vary over time? And what you see towards the left is actually the reference test from the specifications of the manufacturer's testing. So overall, the less turbid samples ended up being the river, which was not what would be expected. You would expect the controller of the filtered water to be less turbid and the river to be more turbid. So really what this told me is that the validity became questioned, and what actually needs to happen is further testing to compare or meet the expectations from what the specifications from the manufacturer created. So overall, in conclusion, what I found was that the discharge and the stream power are directly proportional to the depth values. So knowing the depth would actually help for future cases to know exactly where to test generators and to build a system. Second off, that no power was actually generated, so I couldn't use it for the purpose of my entire system. However, the turbidity sensor itself actually needs separate testing and further testing to create a profile of that particular sensor and whether or not it would actually be useful for water quality testing. So the other aspect of this whole project has been to take what I've learned and actually use it in the classroom. So my pedagogy for this particular project, especially Earth and Space Science, is because we use so much of the alternative and renewable resources within the classroom, create a project-based learning activity, and more so for me in my classroom, this would actually be the students' final project for the whole year. And what they would end up being assigned is to take my experience, use that as their background knowledge, and then take it further from there. So using the aspects of STEAM, what the students would end up doing is to actually engage and explore before they have the assignment given to them. So first off, students would actually be introduced to the topic of hydroelectricity and generation from a video, and then take those observations of the models, the same exact models I used in the testing for the field, and use them in the classroom. Since they are meant to be pipe generators, having a controlled environment in a lab classroom actually helps for these generators so they can see what they are meant for, they can see power generation from these generators, and to actually have them open the generators up and see what's on the inside, so taking the next step. In coupling with this, since many of the students that I have, I teach predominantly freshmen, never have experience formally with circuits, actually introducing circuits as part of this project. So having them use a voltmeter, and getting some application and use from that aspect as well. So having them test these models, report their findings, and begin to analyze as an entire group which of the generators would work better, and actually using that as the basis for the whole project. So the assignment would end up being taking the generator that they deemed more useful or better applicable, and actually using that as a way to adjust the turbines so that they can generate more power. So having them discover what's in the guts of the generator, not having them build the DC battery or motor, but actually having them take the turbine and then redesign it so that if they had to use this in the real world, how would their prototype do? And how would that actually help to improve things like water quality testing or just simply generating more power? So the students would test their prototypes, begin to discuss amongst themselves, and be able to report how would this be useful in their own world or in the real world itself. So overall, this has been a great experience, and I would like to say a huge thank you to both Dr. Ben Calhoun, Dr. John Locke, who unfortunately couldn't be here, as well as to Louise, Victor, for all your help and guidance, as well as Philip for all your help and guidance as well. It's been a great experience, and thank you to NSF and ASSIST for also providing the means to be able to do this. Thank you.